A black young girl in the Bronx, denied by the world before she could even dream, watched her mother's dignity stripped at an airport gate. That wound became fire. At 10, Willa Blake swore the sky would not belong to gatekeepers. It would belong to her, and to everyone they tried to silence. The Bronx, in the summer of 1989, was a place where heat pressed down like judgment, heavy and unrelenting, rising from cracked sidewalks and brick walls until even the air felt tired. On the rooftop of a worn-out apartment building, 10-year-old Willa Blake sat barefoot on the tar, her legs crossed, her body small against the sprawl of the city. She was not looking at the streets below, streets that echoed with sirens, arguments, and the restless laughter of children, but at the sky above. From her earliest days, she sensed it carried rules, but that summer she realized those rules were not meant for girls like her, not for black girls from the Bronx whose mothers saved coins in jars just to get by. That night, above the hum of a broken radio left behind on the steps, a Boeing 747 tore across the sky, magnificent and unapologetic. Its size defied reason, a steel colossus defying gravity as if nothing could touch it. Willa felt the sound in her chest before she heard it in her ears, a low thunder, steady, commanding. For a moment, it seemed to call her name, daring her to imagine herself inside, daring her to believe the heavens might one day belong to her. She stared until the contrail dissolved into the dark, and what remained was not only wonder but a dawning awareness. The sky did not ask permission. People did, systems did, and those systems were already telling her no. Her mother, Maya, had spent the entire year working overtime shifts, setting aside dollars and nickels in a glass jar labeled Sky Fund. The dream was modest but sacred. A trip to Atlanta to visit her sister, a chance for Willa to board a plane and finally know what it felt like to lift above the limits of her neighborhood. At LaGuardia Airport, they waited together in line, boarding passes in hand, both smiling with the quiet disbelief of people who have dared to hope too long. Willa held her mother's hand tightly, heart racing as they stepped forward to the counter. When Maya presented her ID, the agent behind the desk glanced down, then pushed it back with mechanical indifference. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this won't work." Maya's voice was calm but firm. "It's government issued. It's valid." The agent didn't even look at her, only repeated, "Policy," like the word itself was enough to close the door. Then, as if to drive the point deeper, the white man in line behind them confessed he had forgotten his wallet entirely. The agent smiled, handed him a form, and waved him through without hesitation. Willa saw it all, the dismissal in the agent's eyes, the ease with which the man was excused, the silence that fell over her mother. Maya did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She stood there, her shoulders stiff, her jaw locked, and something behind her eyes dimmed. It was not a shock. She had known this kind of humiliation too many times before. It was resignation, the dull ache of dignity denied, the quiet lesson that some people's papers would never be enough. They rode home on the M60 bus, the city flickering past the window. Bodegas still open under neon light, walls covered in graffiti, children chasing one another through bursts of hydrant water. Inside, the bus rattled with noise, but between mother and daughter, there was only silence. Willa kept glancing at her mother, hoping for words of comfort, maybe even outrage, but Maya stared straight ahead, her eyes dry. She was not surprised, and that absence of surprise cut Willa more deeply than rejection itself. She realized then that unfairness was not rare. It was routine. Later that night, unable to sleep, Willa climbed back up to the roof. The air was thick with the day's heat, the horizon painted in bruised purples and fading gold. She hugged her knees and searched the sky until another plane appeared, lights blinking, engines rumbling through the dark. She imagined the passengers inside, laughing, sleeping, reading, moving freely across the heavens as though it was their birthright. She thought of her mother's silence, the way hope had drained from her face at the counter, and she felt a spark rise inside her chest, sharp and unyielding. The world had rules, and those rules had been made to keep people like her waiting on the ground. But the sky itself was different. It did not care about skin color or gender or the neighborhood you came from. The sky did not care whether your name was easy to pronounce at the gate. The sky simply opened for those who found a way to rise. She clenched her fists, her eyes locked on the shrinking outline of the aircraft, and she whispered a vow to the night. She would fly. Not someday with permission reluctantly granted, not as a passenger whose papers could be questioned, but as a pilot, as someone who commanded the machine itself. She would not ask. She would take. She would not beg for the sky. She would claim it. In that moment, the rooftop became something more than a patch of tar under the Bronx stars. It became a threshold, a secret launch pad where a child's pain transformed into determination. The humiliation of LaGuardia did not end with that bus ride. It planted itself deep in her spirit, a seed of defiance watered by injustice. Every time a plane roared overhead, it was no longer a reminder of distance. It was a promise of proximity. One day, she would be there. Years later, when people would see her uniform and her wings, when they would call her a trailblazer or a hero or simply lucky, the truth would remain. It began here. It began with a little black girl on a sweltering rooftop in the Bronx, watching her mother denied the dignity of flight and deciding she would never again wait for permission. She would build her own runway. The sky had rules, yes, but so did she. And her first rule, the one she whispered to herself under that bruised summer sky, was simple. She would fly. The vow she made on that rooftop never dimmed. By the time Willa Blake turned 17, it burned hotter than the summer heat that once pressed against her skin. But in America, fire was not enough. The world she lived in demanded proof, demanded obedience, demanded that a black girl from the Bronx stay in her place. And her place, according to the eyes that judged her, was never the cockpit. She worked as a janitor at LaGuardia, scrubbing the same floors where she had once stood in line with her mother, humiliated and turned away. Every shift smelled of bleach and jet fuel, the scent of labor and longing. She pushed her mop across polished tile while white travelers wheeled suitcases toward gates she could not pass. Sometimes, as pilots strode by in crisp uniforms, gold wings gleaming on their chests, they barely looked at her. One glanced down once, smirking as if amused by the absurd thought that she might want more than her mop. To them, she was background, disposable, invisible. But at night, when the terminal emptied and silence returned, she stood at the wide windows. Beyond the glass, jets clawed into the sky, their thunder shaking her ribs. She pressed her palm against the cold pane and whispered to herself, "One day." Hunger gnawed her stomach, exhaustion blurred her eyes, but desire kept her upright. She was not dreaming of escape. She was demanding her birthright. She scraped together money for flying lessons, every dollar costing her hours bent over a mop, her back aching, her feet raw. The first time she entered a cockpit as a student pilot, the instructor looked at her and chuckled. "Black girls don't fly," he said, shaking his head as though correcting a child's fantasy. The words should have crushed her. Instead, they fused with that rooftop vow and turned into steel. She strapped herself in, wrapped trembling fingers around the yoke, and when the plane lifted, she felt as though she had broken chains. Racism was constant, blunt and sharp in equal measure. Other students, white boys with trust funds and brand new flight jackets, laughed behind her back, calling her diversity hire, long before she was hired anywhere. Instructors second-guessed her every answer, checked her calculations twice, as if numbers carried color. Once, during a check ride, an examiner leaned close and muttered, "Passengers want to feel safe when they see their pilot." The message was clear. Her face, her skin, her existence would always be judged as unsafe. She bled for her hours in the sky. After 12-hour shifts of cleaning toilets, she stumbled into night classes with hands cracked from chemicals. More than once, she fainted from hunger, having skipped meals to pay for another hour of flight time. She studied aerodynamics by flickering lamplight in her tiny apartment, the roar of traffic outside masking the steady whisper in her mind. They want you to quit. Don't. She taped photographs of airplanes above her bed, so even when her eyes closed, she would remember where she was going. Every rejection, every smirk, every slight only sharpened her hunger. One afternoon, as she climbed into a training aircraft, a white classmate sneered, "Try not to crash this one, Blake. We don't need charity cases giving us all a bad name." She didn't respond, but when she took off, her climb was flawless, her bank smooth, her landing precise. The instructor's silence afterward was its own admission. She was better. By 23, she had enough hours to earn her commercial license. It should have been a triumph, but even then, the world reminded her who she was. At an interview for a regional airline, the recruiter looked her over and said flatly, "You know, passengers expect a certain image when they step onto a plane." He smiled without warmth. "You may want to consider ground crew work instead." Willa walked out, her jaw set, her license burning in her pocket. That night, she returned to the rooftop of her childhood building, gazed at the same sky, and swore again no rejection could stop her. If they slammed every door, she would build her own. Her mother, older now, watched with both pride and fear. Pride because her daughter had risen further than anyone in their neighborhood believed possible. Fear because America had a way of punishing women like Willa who refused to bow. But Willa's fire was not a choice anymore. It was survival. Flying was not just an ambition, it was oxygen. Without it, she would suffocate in a world designed to keep her grounded. When she finally donned her first Navy uniform, gold stripes bright against dark fabric, she stood in front of a mirror and let herself weep. Not because the struggle was over, it never would be, but because she had carried the weight of every dismissal, every insult, every barrier, and still found herself here. She saw the reflection of her 10-year-old self, barefoot on a Bronx rooftop, and whispered, "We made it this far." Yet even in triumph, she knew the truth. In the eyes of many, she would always be questioned, always doubted, always told she did not belong. That was the cost of being black, of being a woman, of daring to touch the sky. But the fire inside her had become a blaze, and it promised this: they could not erase her. They could not bury her. Every time her plane rose against the pull of gravity, it carried her vow higher, louder, undeniable. For Willa Blake, flight was more than a dream. It was defiance made visible, a black girl's answer to a world that wanted her silent. And as long as she kept rising, the sky would bear witness to both her suffering and her unshakable will. By the time Willa Blake earned her captain's bars, she carried more than stripes on her sleeve. She carried the rooftop vow like armor, the years of humiliation like sharpened steel. She was no longer the invisible janitor wiping airport floors. She was a pilot, trusted with hundreds of lives. And yet, trust was a fragile thing. In the lounges, colleagues still doubted her. Some muttered diversity hire when she passed. Passengers blinked twice when they saw a black woman step into the cockpit. Prejudice still followed her, but it had long since stopped surprising her. She had not come to the sky for approval. She had come to claim it. The defining moment arrived on a long-haul flight from New York to Sao Paulo. It began as routine: clear weather, full cabin, engines humming steady as the Atlantic opened wide beneath them. Willa's voice over the intercom was calm, professional, a tone honed over years of discipline. The co-pilot beside her, a young man with arrogance in his smile, joked about affirmative action with wings before takeoff. She ignored him. She had bigger battles than his insecurity. Hours into the flight, disaster struck. A deafening bang shook the fuselage, followed by a violent shudder that rattled every bone in the aircraft. Lights flared across the cockpit. One engine had failed, pressure alarms screamed, and turbulence slammed them sideways. In the cabin, oxygen masks dropped, children screamed, and prayers rose in frantic whispers. The co-pilot's hands trembled as he fumbled the checklist, panic cracking his voice. Willa did not panic. The vow inside her, the fire lit on a Bronx rooftop, rose into perfect clarity. Her heartbeat slowed. Her hands, steady as stone, moved across the controls with precision. She cut power to the failing engine, rerouted hydraulics, and recalibrated descent. Each motion was swift, exact, decisive. Her voice over the intercom was ironclad calm. "This is your captain speaking. We are in control. Remain seated." Passengers who moments earlier had thought her presence a risk now clung to her words like lifelines. Outside, the Atlantic stretched merciless and black. The aircraft bucked in the wind, alarms shrieking. The co-pilot muttered, "We can't do this. We won't make it." Willa's eyes never left the instruments. "We will," she said flatly. "Follow my lead." In that cockpit, hierarchy inverted. The young white man with his doubt became the follower, and the black woman he dismissed became the unshakable center of gravity. For hours, she guided the crippled jet, calculating fuel, monitoring pressure, adjusting course with razor-sharp instinct. The aircraft groaned, but it obeyed her. In the cabin, panic quieted as passengers felt the steadiness beneath them. Mothers held their children closer, men unclenched fists, strangers whispered comfort to one another. Fear was still present, but it was tethered to her calm. When Sao Paulo finally appeared on the horizon, it was not just a destination, it was deliverance. Willa lined up the descent, hands sure even as crosswinds buffeted the jet. At 170 tons, the plane hit the runway with a bone-shaking roar. Tires screamed, engines coughed, and then the impossible happened. The aircraft rolled to a stop. Silence reigned for a breathless second, then erupted into sobs and thunderous applause. Passengers wept openly, clapping until their hands stung, cheering the woman who had carried them out of the jaws of death. Willa did not cheer. She sat still, breath controlled, sweat dripping, eyes locked on the dark windshield. Relief coursed through her veins like lightning. Not pride, proof. Proof that her vow had teeth, proof that when the world doubted her most, she had been unshakable. The story swept across America within hours. Headlines blared, "Black woman pilot saves 247 lives." To some, the miracle was survival. To others, the miracle was her. Interviews followed, some reverent, others tinged with disbelief. Reporters asked if she had been too emotional under pressure. Her response was sharp, unforgettable. "I was steady." The men beside me were emotional. I was steady. That sentence echoed through living rooms, newsrooms, and halls of power. For once, America had no choice but to look again. No longer could she be dismissed as a token, a footnote, an anomaly. She was the woman who had stared catastrophe in the face and bent it to her will. She was the girl from the Bronx rooftop, now carved into national memory as proof that brilliance, courage, and leadership do not wear one color or one gender. In the months after, airlines tried to parade her as a symbol. Congress called her to testify, and schools wrote her name into lessons. But Willa knew the truth. She had not flown for applause or headlines. She had flown to keep a vow, to prove that a black woman could hold lives in her hands and deliver them safely home. That flight did more than save 247 souls. It forced America to reckon with itself, to see what it had tried so long to deny. And from that day forward, when people doubted what a black woman could do, Willa Blake's name was the answer. The morning sun bounced off the glass walls of Atlantic Airways headquarters, sharp and blinding. Willa Blake's heels echoed against the marble floor as she walked toward the executive wing, her badge clipped neatly to her blazer. In the polished reflections of the lobby, she saw herself, black, female, young by corporate standards, and knew what they saw too, an inconvenience. Behind the oak doors of the boardroom, white men in dark suits leaned toward one another, voices low. The air smelled of leather and arrogance. They were not discussing the cracked valve that could have killed hundreds. They were discussing her. Too impulsive, too disruptive, too loud. Words sharpened to strip her of authority. By noon, her badge no longer opened the door. The official phrase was administrative leave. The truth was exile. A black woman had dared to ground a multi-million-dollar flight, and for that, she had to be punished. Willa left the building with the same calm she had carried into it. Outside, traffic roared, indifferent. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She remembered her mother's face on that bus years ago, shoulders stiff, dignity eroded by a single word: policy. That memory was no longer just a wound. It was fuel. While the company tried to silence her, she worked in the shadows. Nights in hangars, notebooks filling with details others ignored, mismatched log entries, hushed admissions from mechanics, whispered warnings that vanished into paperwork. She became the keeper of everything Atlantic wanted erased. Then came the Dallas crash. Sirens, smoke, headlines, same aircraft model, same sensor. This time, families wept on live television. America gasped. Willa did not. She had seen it coming. And now silence was impossible. Her statement hit the airwaves like a thunderclap. No lawyer, no PR polish, just truth. She named the negligence, the culture of dismissal, the arrogance that valued profit over lives. And suddenly, her voice was no longer a whisper in a hangar. It was everywhere. Congress summoned her. The hearing room was a stage set in stone and steel. Cold air hummed from vents. Cameras blinked red. Rows of men in suits shifted in their leather chairs, avoiding her gaze. She sat alone at the table, hands steady, eyes bright as aircraft lights cutting through fog. "Why did you ground the Sao Paulo flight?" a senator asked. "Because something was wrong," she replied. "Why did you wait to come forward?" Her answer cracked through the silence. "Because when people like me speak up, we're not called right. We're not called brave. We're called difficult. So we collect facts. We build cases so airtight the truth can't wriggle free. And even then, we're told to wait outside." The room froze. Reporters looked up from their notes. The weight of her words hung heavier than applause. The clip traveled faster than jet engines. On television screens, in classrooms, on phones clutched by teenage girls in Detroit and Houston, her face appeared. Calm, unyielding, unafraid. Letters poured in. "You look like me. You made me believe." A veteran wrote, "You reminded us we matter." Atlantic Airways could not bury her now. Public outrage pressed against their walls like a storm. Reluctantly, bitterly, they called her back. They placed a title on the table: Vice President of Safety and Compliance. It was not respect. It was a dare. Prove yourself. Fix what you claim is broken. She accepted. Her first move: strip the audits bare, make every warning traceable. Her second: build a whistleblower portal, shielded by law, anonymous, untouchable. Her third: throw open the doors. Public forums, passengers, crew, even grieving families, all invited to speak truths executives had ignored for decades. The resistance came fast. White male executives resigned rather than answer to her. Whisper campaigns painted her as reckless. A tabloid headline sneered, "Diversity hire endangers industry." One night, her tires were slashed in the company lot. But Willa had weathered worse storms. She had scrubbed terminals as a janitor. She had been told her dream was ambitious when she circled aerospace technician on a school test. She knew these attacks weren't about competence. They were about color, about gender, about power. And she refused to shrink. A year later, Atlantic's safety record was the strongest in the nation. FAA inspectors adopted her reforms. Training programs swelled with women and students of color who once believed the sky was closed to them. Slowly, reluctantly, undeniably, the industry bent. A journalist asked how it felt to finally be recognized. She answered softly, "I didn't do this to be recognized. I did this so no mother has to bury her child because someone ignored a crack." Willa Blake had been punished for speaking, sidelined for saving lives, and doubted because of her skin. And yet, she had turned exile into reform, humiliation into blueprint, silence into a storm. She was no longer the girl told to wait outside. She was the woman rewriting the rules of the sky. And now, because of her, no child would ever again look at the heavens and believe it was built only for others. The hangar smelled of rust and dust. The morning Skyrise Academy opened its doors. The roof leaked in one corner, and the paint peeled from the walls. But to Willa Blake, it was beautiful. She stood at the front, wings pinned neatly to her blazer, her voice steady as 40 young men and women, her very first class, filed into folding chairs. They came with second-hand backpacks, hand-me-down shoes, and faces caught between disbelief and wonder. Some had never been this close to an aircraft. Some had never dared to imagine they belonged anywhere near one. The ceremony was nothing glamorous. A borrowed microphone screeched against the walls. The stage was a wooden pallet draped with a wrinkled flag. But when Willa stepped up, silence fell. She told them about a rooftop in the Bronx, about her mother being denied at LaGuardia, about the promise she had made under a purple sky. "I will fly. Not just for me. For everyone told, not you, not here, not yet." Her voice cracked, but she didn't apologize. She wanted them to feel the weight of her vow, and to understand that now it belonged to them too. She asked each student to share why they had come. One by one, the voices rose. A boy whispered that his older brother had died in a construction accident, and he wanted a future that lifted him higher. A girl said she had watched a pilot walk past her gate and thought, "I didn't know women could do that." Then Jasmine stood. Small, her uniform slightly oversized, she cleared her throat and said, "When I was 8, I got lost in an airport. Everyone stepped over me. But a woman in uniform found me and made me feel safe. I didn't know then that she was Willa Blake. Now I'm here because I want to do for someone else what she did for me." The room went still. Willa lowered her gaze, tears stinging her eyes. She had saved lives midair, stopped disasters before they began. But this confession from a girl who had once been invisible, was the truest proof that her fight mattered. Then came Carlos. 17, sharp eyes, quiet voice. "I don't want to prove people wrong," he said. "I want to prove myself right." His words carried a steel edge, the same one Willa had carried when she circled aerospace on a school aptitude test, even after being told to pick something appropriate. She recognized in him not just ambition but inevitability. The days were long, the training grueling. They had only 2 simulators, both decades old. The heating broke in January. More than once they held lectures by flashlight during power outages. Yet the students stayed. They stayed because Willa demanded excellence, because she drilled them with the same precision that had once grounded a Sao Paulo flight. "Planes don't fall because of the big things," she reminded them. "They fall because of the little things people ignore, and we will not ignore them." She stayed with them late into the night, walking between rows of cockpits, correcting their grip on controls, pressing their shoulders when they faltered. Sometimes she caught Carlos asleep at the simulator, headphones still on. Sometimes she found Jasmine scribbling notes until her pencil broke. Willa never told them to stop. She only whispered, "Keep climbing." Critics circled. Local papers sneered. Aviation diversity experiment. Politicians hinted that the school was reckless, even dangerous. But Willa opened the hangar doors. She invited parents, reporters, and skeptics. She let them sit in the simulators, let them see the drills, let them hear the quiet hum of students who refused to quit. One news anchor stepped out of a cockpit in tears. "I didn't know something so powerful could feel so peaceful." And then came the proof no critic could erase. A Skyrise student, mid-training, diverted a malfunctioning plane during a practice run and landed safely, saving dozens. Headlines flipped overnight. No one called them diversity hires anymore. They called them heroes. The academy grew. New York, Atlanta, Chicago. Each new hangar bore a mural painted by local youth. Silhouettes of black girls with wings, Latino boys in cockpits, children with eyes lifted to the sky. Willa stood before each class and told them the same thing. Legacy is not what you leave behind, it's what you launch. But the truest legacy was not in the murals or the medals. It was in the night that Willa stood by the runway, watching Jasmine lift off for her first solo flight. The aircraft climbed steadily, wings slicing the morning light. Willa pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "She's going to be all right." Or the day Carlos ran a safety briefing for younger cadets, his voice calm, commanding. In that moment, she saw not just students, but successors, proof that the door she had built would never close again. Skyrise Academy was not born from privilege or wealth. It was born from pain, from the ache of exclusion, from the fire of a promise whispered under a bruised purple sky. And now, with every takeoff, with every student who rose higher than the world expected, Willa's vow became something bigger than herself. The sky had once told her, "Not you." Now it thundered with the voices of hundreds saying, "We belong." And for the first time, Willa Blake believed that maybe the sky had always been waiting for them. The academy was thriving. Students were flying higher than anyone believed possible. Parents lined the fences during training runs. News crews filmed murals of black girls painted with wings. For the first time, Willa Blake felt something close to peace. Then came the rally. A political candidate, red tie snapping in the wind, stood on a stage before a restless crowd and spat venom into the microphone. "They're training kids to crash planes into towers. This is not education. This is a threat. Wake up, America!" The words cut across the evening news like a blade. Within hours, they ricocheted across television screens, headlines, and social feeds. A project born from hope was suddenly painted as a danger. The backlash was swift. Parents pulled their children from enrollment lists. Sponsors froze their donations. Death threats poured into Skyrise's inbox. Reporters camped outside the gates, their cameras hungry for conflict. One night, graffiti appeared across the hangar doors in dripping red paint. "Ground them before they fly." Inside the academy, students whispered in fear. Jasmine sat at her desk, jaw clenched, pretending not to hear. Carlos burned with rage, his fists balled tight. Elijah, now an instructor, wanted to fight fire with fire. "Let me speak, Mom," he told Willa. "Let me call this out for what it is. They can't tear us down if we stand tall." Willa placed a hand on his shoulder. "We don't fight with their weapons. We fight with flight. We stay steady. We fly true, and we show them what grace under pressure looks like." But at night, alone in her office, the weight pressed hard. She remembered her mother's silence on the bus after LaGuardia, remembered the sting of being told, "Not you," again and again. Now the same blade was turned against her students. She could withstand the attacks. But could they? She decided the only answer was sunlight. Skyrise Academy flung open its gates. They invited journalists, skeptical parents, and even critics. The hangar buzzed with drills, simulators, and flight checks. Students stood tall in their uniforms, explaining systems, reciting safety protocols with precision sharper than steel. A news anchor climbed into a simulator and emerged in tears. "I didn't know something so powerful could feel so peaceful." Carlos stepped forward with a folder. He had been working in secret for months. "Scholarship program," he told Willa. "Full ride for kids like me. All they have to do is write why they want to fly." Willa read his proposal, her throat tightening. He had written it with the same fierce determination she once used to ground a Sao Paulo flight. He wasn't just learning, he was leading. Still, the shadows did not retreat easily. Late one night, Willa returned to the academy to find the office windows shattered. Glass glittered on the floor like ice. A note was taped to the wall. "Your time is up." For a moment, fear gripped her chest. She thought of Jasmine's wide eyes, Carlos's steady voice, and Elijah's unbroken will. Then she straightened. If the cost of building a door wide enough for others was bearing their hatred, then she would pay it. Weeks later, the academy held an open-air flight demonstration. Families gathered under the summer sun. Reporters circled, cameras ready. Willa stood with Jasmine at her side as Carlos prepared for a precision landing drill. The aircraft dipped, corrected, then touched the runway with flawless grace. The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled. Parents wept. "This is who we are," Willa said into the microphone, her voice clear and unflinching. "We are not a threat. We are not a danger. We are the future of flight. And the future belongs to everyone." Her words hit like lightning. That night, instead of smear headlines, news anchors replayed the demonstration. Sponsors returned. Enrollment doubled. And the whispers of doubt that had haunted Skyrise began to dissolve. Still, Willa knew the fight was not over. Prejudice did not vanish with applause. It lingered like turbulence, unseen, unexpected, ready to strike. But she also knew this. The students had tasted the sky. And once you've flown, no storm can keep you on the ground. Skyrise Academy had survived its first true trial. And in surviving, it had proven something larger than aviation. It had proven that hope could be slandered, threatened, even attacked with broken glass. But it could not be grounded. Because the sky did not belong to those who built walls of fear. It belonged to those who dared to rise above them. The idea that had begun on a rooftop in the Bronx was no longer confined to New York. By the time Skyrise Academy reached its 5th year, applications were arriving in envelopes stamped with foreign postmarks: Brazil, Kenya, the Philippines. They came not through glossy partnerships or celebrity endorsements, but through word of mouth, through community leaders who had heard of a flight school that gave working-class kids a chance at the sky. The first international students were 3 teenagers from Sao Paulo, sponsored by a Brazilian NGO that supported youth from the favelas. They spoke little English when they arrived, but their essays, translated and published in a local paper, described the same hunger Willa had known as a girl, a yearning for something beyond the boundaries of poverty and prejudice. Soon after, a Nairobi-based foundation called, offering to fund a handful of Kenyan students. Within a year, the Skyrise hangar echoed with accents from across the globe. Reporters began to notice. Aviation trade magazines wrote cautiously at first. Community school in the Bronx welcomes global cohort. Then larger outlets followed, curious how a program run out of a refurbished hangar was drawing attention from across continents. "Is the future of flight training being built in the Bronx?" asked one headline. The attention brought pressure. The Federal Aviation Administration began sending auditors more frequently, ensuring training protocols met every letter of regulation. European officials from EASA in Brussels sent queries asking whether Skyrise certifications would be recognized abroad. For Willa, the bureaucracy felt familiar, another door that had to be pushed open inch by inch. She reminded her students that skepticism was part of the fight, Not a sign to stop. Not everyone welcomed the growth. Commentators on talk radio sneered about outsourcing American dreams. One pundit claimed, "We're handing cockpits over to kids who barely speak English." Willa heard the echoes of her childhood, the same dismissals dressed in new clothes. Yet she refused to dignify the attacks with anger. "We'll answer in the air," she told her students. "Every safe landing is our reply." Invitations to speak began to arrive. First, it was a regional conference on aviation safety in Nairobi, then a youth summit in Rio de Janeiro. Willa was careful. She declined offers that seemed more interested in her image than her message, but she accepted those where she could bring students along, letting them speak for themselves. On a stage in Johannesburg, Jasmine described flying for the first time and the discipline it demanded. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Willa stood in the wings, proud but quiet, content to let the next generation carry the words. The real breakthrough came not from speeches but from results. Carlos, now one of the Academy's top trainees, placed first in a regional flight competition in Atlanta, outperforming cadets from programs backed by multi-million-dollar airlines. The footage of his flawless landing circulated online, sparking headlines across Latin America and Africa. Skyrise pilot shows world-class skill. Donations surged, but so did scrutiny. Conservative lawmakers questioned why federal grants supported a niche program in the Bronx. International students sometimes faced delays in getting visas, their dreams trapped in paperwork. Willa met with officials in Washington, armed not with rhetoric, but with statistics. Accident-free training hours, certification pass rates higher than the national average, graduates placed in respected airlines. She knew data could speak a language politics couldn't twist. Through it all, Willa insisted on grounding Skyrise in its origins. The hangar in the Bronx remained the heart of the Academy. The walls still bore murals of black girls with wings, painted by neighborhood artists. Every new international partnership was tethered back to that space, reminding the students, and Willa herself, that the dream began not as a global campaign, but as one girl's refusal to stay grounded. On a cold winter morning, she walked the hangar floor as a group of students prepared for flight. One was from Detroit, another from Nairobi, another from a favela outside Rio. They checked instruments side by side, their voices blending into a language of focus and precision. Willa paused, struck by the quiet power of it. This was not about fame, nor about proving critics wrong. It was about watching the impossible become ordinary. Later that year, the United Nations invited her to a youth innovation forum. She hesitated, wary of the spectacle, but eventually agreed, on the condition that 3 students could stand beside her. On the day of the speech, she said little about herself. Instead, she pointed to them. "The world once told me the sky was not for me," she said. "Now I watch these young pilots carry it further than I ever could. That is our future." The hall rose to its feet. Cameras flashed. But Willa's eyes stayed on her students. They were the proof, the living rebuttal to every doubt. The Bronx rooftop had expanded into a horizon wide enough for the world. When the Smithsonian announced that Willa Blake's Boeing 747 would be installed at the National Air and Space Museum, the news struck like lightning. For generations, the museum had told the story of American flight through the voices of white men in uniforms. Now, a black woman's name would stand among them, not in the margins, not as a footnote, but emblazoned across steel that could not be erased. The unveiling day felt less like a ceremony than like a reckoning. By dawn, a line wrapped around the museum. School children clutched notebooks, their teachers whispering, "You will remember this." Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with mothers who had once been told their children's dreams were impossible. When the curtains fell, the hall gasped. The 747 gleamed under spotlights, its vast wings stretching overhead, its side painted in bold letters, "The Willa Blake." Willa stepped to the podium. For a moment, she let the silence breathe, the weight of 1,000,000 unspoken histories filling the air. "This plane," she began, "once carried hundreds of souls through a storm that many believed we could not survive. But this is not only about survival. It is about truth. For too long, truth was bent to fit fear, whose hands were trusted on the controls, whose names were remembered. Today, that truth stands unedited, and it will remain." Applause shook the rafters, but not everyone celebrated. Atlantic Airways, the corporation that once suspended her, silenced her, tried to erase her, saw opportunity. Their executives approached with rehearsed smiles and polished contracts. They wanted to fund the exhibit, to stamp their logo across the museum, to film a documentary reframing themselves as pioneers of inclusion. "Let us tell your story the right way," one of them said. Willa's refusal was swift. "Truth doesn't need editing." Her words cut sharper than any lawsuit she had ever filed. She would not let the same hands that denied her write themselves as heroes in a story they once tried to bury. That night, headlines carried her answer. "Blake rejects corporate rewrite." For the first time, the public saw not just her triumph, but her refusal to compromise history. Months later, at LaGuardia Airport, another unveiling drew crowds. This time, it was not for her. It was for the woman who had once stood quietly humiliated while guards denied her boarding. Maya Blake, Willa's mother. A new Boeing 747 stood on the tarmac, christened with a name curved across its nose in elegant script: Queen Maya. The crowd fell into reverent silence as the tarp dropped. Willa pressed her palm to the steel, tears flowing openly. "My mother never got her flight," she said, her voice breaking but clear. "She bore humiliation so I could bear hope. Today her name will cross oceans. Today she boards every flight." The jet roared to life, engines rising like a hymn. As Queen Maya lifted into the sky, people wept. Some cheered. Others simply stood, their faces tilted upward, as if watching history itself take flight. Two images soon defined America's memory of Willa Blake. One, the great silver body of the Willa Blake in the Smithsonian, frozen in time under museum lights. The other, Queen Maya alive and moving, streaking across the clouds, carrying her mother's dignity where it had once been denied. Together, they told a story the nation could no longer ignore. Yet Willa herself refused to let these honors become an ending. The very next morning, back at Skyrise, she faced her students. "A name in a museum, a name on a jet," she told them. "These are symbols. Symbols matter. They prove the fight left a mark, but don't let them trap us in glass. This story is not finished. It lives in your hands. Every flight you take, every door you hold open, every voice you refuse to silence. That is the real memorial. That is how truth keeps flying." Carlos met her gaze with the steady fire of a man ready to lead. Jasmine scribbled her words furiously, as if they were coordinates to carry forward. Around them, students straightened, their eyes bright with recognition. The honors were not monuments to stare at. They were torches to carry. That night, as the Smithsonian's spotlights glowed over the Willa Blake, and passengers snapped photos beside Queen Maya before boarding, Americans whispered her name in classrooms, in kitchens, in churches. Willa Blake had become more than a pilot, more than an activist. She was a mirror and a challenge, because she had shown the world that truth could be threatened, suspended, slandered, even nearly erased. But it could not be grounded, and as long as the Willa Blake stood in the museum and Queen Maya cut across the clouds, the message would remain. The sky is not for the gatekeepers. It belongs to those who dare to rise and open it for others. The rooftop in the Bronx had changed over the years. Graffiti brighter, towers higher, the air less forgiving. But for Willa Blake, it still carried the weight of beginnings. She brought her students there, Jasmine in her pressed cadet uniform, Carlos with his instructor's badge, Elijah steady at her side. They crowded close on the cracked tar roof, waiting for her to speak. She pointed to the sky, now washed in the bruised colors of evening. "This," she said, "is where it all started. I was 10 years old, sitting barefoot, watching a plane carve freedom across the clouds. And down here, the world told me no." Silence held them. The city's usual noise seemed to bend around her words. Somewhere above, a departing jet rumbled, low and steady, like an answer from the heavens. Willa turned to them, her voice gaining weight. "They will tell you the era of racism is behind us. They will tell you that sexism no longer locks doors. They will tell you ambition has no color, no gender. But every time a black child is told their dream is too big, every time a woman is mistaken for the assistant instead of the lead, every time truth is buried to protect profit, we are reminded the gatekeepers are still here. The sky still has rules not written for us." Jasmine's jaw tightened. Carlos's hands curled into fists. Elijah looked at his mother with a reverence he had never outgrown. "But hear me now," Willa continued, her eyes blazing. "Legacy is not the metals and glass, not the names painted on steel. Legacy is what you do when no one is watching. Do you flag the broken valve, or look away? Do you kneel for the girl hiding under a chair, or step over her? Do you rise when the world whispers, 'Not you, not now'? Because if you don't, the sky will close again. And not for me, for those who come after you." Her words hung heavy, like scripture cut into the air. She stepped closer to the edge of the rooftop, the skyline behind her a jagged crown of light. "I am not alive because I was lucky. Hundreds are alive because I refused to look away. And you, each of you, carry that same fire. Don't you dare waste it." Then she said the words that would echo long after her voice fell silent. "The sky does not belong to those who guard its gates. It belongs to those who never stop reaching, and who pull others up with them." The cadets erupted, cheers, sobs, shouts of amen. Phones rose, live streams lit, her figure framed against the sunset like an icon carved into flame. Commentators would later call it the rooftop speech. But for those who stood there, it was less history than ignition. And then, as if the sky itself conspired, a deep vibration swept the air. Every head turned upward. Cutting across the horizon, her mother's namesake, the Boeing 747 Queen Maya, roared into view. Painted white and gold, its engines thundered as it passed directly above the rooftop, low enough that the students could see the glint of windows catching fire in the last light of day. Gasps broke through the crowd. Jasmine clasped her hands over her mouth. Carlos's eyes brimmed. Elijah whispered, "Mama, it's her." Willa looked up, tears blurring her vision. The plane cut the sky like scripture, its shadow spilling over the rooftop where a little girl once sat barefoot and wounded. She raised her hand high, palm open, as if saluting both the past and the future. "My mother never got her flight," she said, voice breaking but unbowed. "But tonight, she flies with us." The students cheered, their voices rising in unison with the roar of the engines. Phones shook as they captured the image. A black woman on a Bronx rooftop, arm lifted to the heavens, Queen Maya soaring above like a crown of wings. It would become the photograph on magazine covers, classroom posters, and murals across America, the picture of a legacy made flesh. As the jet disappeared into the violet horizon, the rooftop fell quiet again. Willa lowered her hand and turned to her students. "This is your sky now. Don't ask for it. Don't wait for it. Take it, and make sure it carries others." That night, the clip of the rooftop speech paired with Queen Maya's flyover spread faster than news anchors could narrate it. People who had never stepped on a plane shared it. Parents showed it to their children. Activists played it on repeat at rallies. It was no longer just Willa's story. It had become a nation's reminder.
Because the sky remembers, the question is, will we? Willa Blake's journey is more than the story of one woman who dared to fly. It is the story of every parent who sacrificed quietly, every child who was told their dream was too big, every worker overlooked because of the color of their skin or the sound of their name. She carried all of them when she refused to bend. Her courage asks us a question we cannot ignore. When dignity is denied, will we stand silent or will we stand tall? For those of us who have lived long enough to know the weight of silence, this story is a reminder that change is never given. It is claimed with persistence, with sacrifice, with truth spoken out loud even when it costs everything. If this story reached you, let it not end here. Share it, so others remember that one voice can still shake the ground. Leave a comment. Tell us what part of her fight stays with you. Your words may be the spark someone else needs. Subscribe to our channel and walk with us as we bring you more stories of courage, justice, and hope. Thank you for staying until the end, for listening with both heart and mind. May this day bring you clarity, strength, and the resolve to rise again, because the sky, as Willa taught us, was never meant to be closed. It was meant to be opened for all.